Ronald Reagan was a huge fan of employee ownership, and so too were most of the Democrats. So it's everybody sort of says yes. And in the Citizens' Share, one of the points was you get back to the founding of the country. The vision that Jefferson, Madison, Washington had was one of all of us would be small employee-owned farmers. That was the America that they saw. And they would have been much in favor of employee ownership of the kind we have today if they could have seen what we have.
Welcome to Paychex Thrive, a business podcast where you'll hear timely insights to help you navigate marketplace dynamics and propel your business forward. Here's your host, Gene Marks.
Hey everybody, it's Gene Marks and welcome back to another episode of the Paychex Thrive podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. And by the way, before we get started, just want to remind you, if you want any tips or advice, help, links to prior podcasts that we've done, come and join our newsletter list. If you go to paychex.com/thrive, you can sign up for our free newsletter. You'll really get a lot of insights to help you run your business. That's paychex.com/thrive. So anyway, thanks for joining us. I have a very special guest today. It is Dr. Richard Freeman. He is the Herbert Asherman Professor of Economics at Harvard University, and he serves as the co-director of the Labor and Work-Life Program at Harvard Law School. Richard Freeman, Dr. Freeman has written a number of books over the years, and he specializes in labor economics. And Richard, is that a fair way to call you? I mean, would you call yourself a labor economist?
Yes, although recently, in the last 10 years, I've shifted some of my interests to the economics of science and technology because it affects labor so much, and about China because that also affects the whole country so much by moving from a poor country to a wealthier competitor of ours.
That's great. You know, it's funny. I write about AI, artificial intelligence, for Forbes like 6 to 7 times a month, and I do a lot of speaking on it. And I've been speaking a lot about it this year. And to your point, that presentation that I'm doing right now on AI, it's all about how it's impacting businesses. It's a business conversation, but I see it doing exactly what you just said. Ultimately, I see my writing and my presentation evolve into more of a workplace thing, because technology is all about, getting more productivity out of your people. So I definitely understand why you're focusing on that,
Yes, and there's a key point about the AI and other technologies, but this is the one that I think is most compelling. It's about who owns the benefits from it. And that's where employee ownership kind of things come in. Because if the AI can accomplish some of the things that they believe it will in the next 5 or 10 years, there are going to be a lot of workers who have problems. Skills that they had can now be taken by the machine. And it's not obvious what other things they will end up doing. They'll end up doing something, and if it's more of a tool that workers use, so they are the owner of the technology, I think it's a better chance that it would be beneficial to workers and not harm a sizable number of workers.
I want to stay on this topic. I do want to talk about employee ownership, and we will get to that in this conversation. But we are talking about AI, and I'm kind of curious. So you say you're teaching it right now, you're doing some work in that field and how it impacts the labor force. Do you feel like you have enough data right now to come up with any types of conclusions as to what AI's impact is on the workforce?
Well, the OECD thinks they have enough data to do that. So do some other government and international organizations. And I don't think that that's true. And they do calculations and they tell us what they think, and it's useful. I view the AI as there's three possible effects on us, on the workers. And I'm not sure which is right, so I'm very agnostic. One is there are a set of people, including like young computer science students at my university and elsewhere, and experts in AI, who are really scared about that it's going to have tremendously negative effects on us. That and us now being white collar people in particular, because blue collar people, the robots and the kind of things that do physical work, they're still way behind what the artificial intelligence can do in the digital world that we live in. So there's a legitimate fear here that something is going to go really bad. The second view is what you'll find in the government documents and the international documents. Well, there's some occupations that will be substantially affected, but there'll be other occupations that will benefit. And every time in the past we had automation scares, and depending on the age of the audience, people may or may not have remembered some of them, but they occur every, 20, 30 years. There's a fear. And every time the economy has turned out, and the people have turned out to be resilient, and they just shift what they do. And some people obviously lose, and some people benefit. But in the end, we're all better off because it's more productive. That's, I would say, the view you would hear from the sort of mainstream
right.
groups. And the third thing is that actually it's going to be a savior for us. We are faced with tremendous problems, the climate change. We need more resources, more output to, clean output. Let's phrase that right. Things to clean the planet. There are other problems of in a whole lot of poor countries where people really are still very poor, and that breeds bad stuff. And so we would like to see those economies move. And there, the AI could just be an incredible help to us. It makes us all more productive, or hopefully all of us. I mean, some people will always lose. So I've proposed that we should think about it as a possible savior, the great technological advance that'll help us through a very difficult period of time with climate change and other things going on.
Gee, those three things are not really mutually exclusive, are they? I mean, I would think all three of those things could ultimately happen, don't you think?
Yes, you're right. But you kind of need to get what's the main thrust. If most of it is that it's threatening to us and it's being used in bad ways and we're losing our jobs, the fact that it's helping deal with other economic problems is less important. And if it goes the way past automation technologies go, which takes a long time to really spread and affect everybody. By that point, people have adjusted, schools will have adjusted. Then it'll be a reasonably positive bump in the road, and what will be neither I call it a boogeyman, kind of the monster that scares us, or a savior. But I wouldn't rule out the boogeyman and the savior response. Last year, I teach a class that deals with some of these issues, and a group of computer science students really didn't attack me or anything, but they sort of said I was way too positive on the AI, and they then laid out and wrote their class papers about how we really should worry. I took that very serious. Young students studying this, they obviously know the technology better than I would and that most of us would. And if they were really troubled, and it's their futures, of course, they're looking forward. Oh, 20 years from now, will I have a job where I, can be a leader and do things? Or is the leader going to be an artificial intelligence program that accesses way more knowledge and information than any human can have in their head?
You're a student of history and you study labor economics and you teach it. You out of anybody know that there has been, jobs that have been replaced by technology since, the beginning of society. I think it was like 19th century London. Weren't there people climbing up on street lamps to put out the gas lamps at the end of each night?
Oh, sure.
And there were people, I saw one photos of like people like tapping on people's windows to wake them up in the morning because there wasn't like alarm clocks, and, there's no blacksmiths around nowadays. There's, I don't think I see any typing pools anywhere unless I'm watching a episode of Mad Men, So, I mean, you out of anybody knows that technology changes, it replaces jobs, but people adapt, right? It creates new economies. I'm curious then, like based on all the years that you've been studying labor, and what you've seen with technology in the past, what do you think the opportunities will be? What jobs do you think will AI, a technology like this, replace going forward? And what opportunities do you think, specific opportunities, could be created?
Okay. Well, I mean, the history is that the technologies tended to replace blue collar manual labor jobs, and the white collar people were sort of protected in some sense. And so we've seen the whole economy shifted from very blue collar to primarily white collar. The blue collar people deal with the real world. You build a house, you've got to, it's construction, you have to do real things. What's happened has been the white collar work has shifted to the computer. It's been digitalized. And so this is the first time we're going to have a major change in technology in a space where, let me phrase it this way, the AI and any algorithm, computer algorithm, lives happily on digital space. That's its home. It's not your home and my home. It's younger people are probably closer to being their home if you brought up with cell phones and this and that. But it's still not our home. And so I do think it's going to have some very strong effects on the white collar people. And we're going to have to be companies will have to be very careful how they define jobs so that the people can do something creative that the machine can't do. But in the end, I always think about, do I want to have an expert doctor deal with my ailment, whatever it is? Or would I rather have an AI program that has in its database every single ailed person in the world and their diseases, way more knowledge than my doctor would have? And my doctor has one good thing. He could see me, but now the computer can see me also. And they're doing one of the things they're doing with AI, which is very interesting, I suppose, or good. They're looking at your pupils, and they can now have programs that'll try to tell what diseases you might have by just looking in your eyes. Seeing and then they're going to put more sensors in our bodies so they will know if this organ is failing. I suppose if I had a choice between a doctor and that new AI-driven healthcare, I would personally choose the new AI-driven healthcare.
I agree.
And that creates a problem for the doctor.
Well, I agree. And yet you just mentioned we would have algorithms that could detect things by looking in somebody's eyes and then that would lead to more sensors maybe being put in a body, like what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink, right now. But yes. Then I also think to myself, okay, well, there's going to need to be procedures and controls. There's going to be companies that are going to manage this type of technology that's going to be used in the medical profession. And there will be companies that will need to still make those sensors and sell them and develop them and market them.
Yes.
And I think like, all right, and these are companies that don't really exist now, but will exist and will be needing to employ people to, to run those companies. So.
No. I mean, I agree. I think we're going to have so many. That's why I'm more in the savior view. There's so much things we want to do and we can do. And science now makes possible for people to live much longer, and they're doing all kinds of miraculous, what I call miraculous stuff, and that just needs a lot of effort. It needs effort from the machines and from people, but it's got to be worked out and in a careful way. And there's always this danger that, the boogeyman or the AI will have so much more tap knowledge in its head because it taps into giant databases that it'll be tough for us to find, a good space. Now, if that were to occur, and if we had employee ownership of that asset, everybody would be getting very nice checks because they're owning the capital. If the AI is owned, you met Mr. Musk, if he owned all of the AI in the world, I think we'd all be scared and worried. I mean, there are other people and they're competing companies and they're competing countries. So we're far, far from that outcome. But it's not an unimaginable outcome that we could end up in something like that.
Well, you brought up employee ownership, and I'm glad you did. You wrote a book back in 2013 called "The Citizen Share: Putting Ownership Back into Democracy." So, Richard, first of all, just to position this next part of our conversation, I personally, now this is anecdotally, am seeing a strong interest that I've never seen in employee ownership from business owners, because business owners themselves, the average age of the U.S. business owner is about 55 years old, according to the Small Business Administration. We're getting older. A lot of people are thinking of succession planning and exiting, and they look to find a buyer for their business. Some are having less success than others, and they've got a pool of employees to sell shares to. But then also there have been numerous studies that have shown, including your analysis, that have shown that companies that are employee owned tend to be more productive and more profitable than other companies. So putting that all into a framework now, give us your thoughts on employee ownership, Richard. Like, why you seem like you're a very strong advocate of it. Tell us why.
Well, I mean, advocate of it because one is it is economically successful. And obviously, not every employee-owned operation succeeds, but on average, it succeeds with higher productivity, and it distributes the benefits of the higher productivity and its profits much more evenly. I was going to use the word fairly, but fairly may have some, I don't know.
That's up to whoever defines the word fairly.
Yes, exactly. But it's clear that people who are employees in an employee-owned company, when they leave with a sizable amount of capital. And when we talk about inequality in the U.S. and probably every other country in the world, capital is much more unequally distributed than labor income. So lots of people have very little or no capital. Maybe you have your house, and almost everybody has a job and work. So everybody has some income coming in from labor. This changes the picture for those workers. And since the company is being made more productive, profitable, it's good for the company as well. It's to me a yes situation, And it is strangely, or maybe not strangely, but it is the one economic policy on which Democrats and Republicans have traditionally, agreed on. Ronald Reagan was a huge fan of employee ownership, and so too were most of the Democrats. So it's everybody sort of says yes, and in the Citizens' Share, one of the points was you get back to the founding of the country. The vision that Jefferson, Madison, Washington had was one of all of us would be small employee-owned farmers. That was the America that they saw, and they would have been much in favor of employee ownership of the kind we have today if they could have seen what we have.
I'd like to even throw out some other things to even complement what you just said. As an accountant, as a CPA, the tax advantages of an employee-owned business are significant.
Yes.
Because again, you deduct principal and interest when you're paying back the bank who buys a portion of your shares. Plus, I think that whatever percentage that the employee-owned entity owns is non-taxable. The income of it is not taxable. So I did a piece on this for the Philly Inquirer and the Chicago Daily Herald. I probably interviewed about 20 business owners that ran employee-owned companies, all, maybe 30% to 100% employee-owned. Every single one of them said it was the best decision they ever made, right? So there's all these good things. And then you just mentioned, the productivity and the profitability. Employees, are better when they have a little piece of the pie, and retirement benefits. And yet a very small percentage of companies are employee owned still, and I wonder why you think that is, and what can be done about that.
Well, if you take ESOPs as the bedrock of the thing, it's a small number of companies, but it's about 10% of the U.S. workforce.
Sure.
So, and that I tell my friends in the union movement, I say in the private sector, the employee owned is 10% and you are 6%. They, in some sense, can do more, and you ought to be more friendly and, whatever the right word is, supportive of employee ownership. And there's some unions actually go in, see that, but some don't, because they have, collective bargaining is their mode of doing business. Why hasn't it grown more, given the advantages? If I knew the answer, I would, rush off and say, this is what we've got to do. The tax benefits were reduced under President Clinton when he and Newt Gingrich felt that cutting budget deficits mattered, and this is what they would sacrifice, which is one of the worst decisions you could make. And so there is that. There's a lot of, to form a business, to set up your company as an employee owned, you got to learn some new things. You've got to go to accountants and lawyers. States have set up now, special state offices to help you, which, free advice from the state, because they're favorable to this. And I think it'd be great if we saw a big burst, but we don't. Your comment about the aging of the owners, and it would be just wonderful to see this take off in a way. It's been at about 10% of the workforce for 30 years. But that's not, we're leaving out ownership through non-ESOPs in this business. There is, people own through stock options that gives you an ownership stake. You can have employee share programs that give you an ownership stake. If you add all those in, you're getting to a higher amount, obviously. But the reason the ESOP is considered the the bedrock. It is that you have ownership and you have some decision power. Whereas some of the other forms of ownership, are more like profit sharing. Yes, if the company does well, I get something, but I can't really affect decisions of the company. And that loses the thing of getting the workers really grooved up and being able to affect change if they want.
Yeah, I think everything you said makes complete sense. And it's like any answer to a complicated question, there's always many answers, and like you said, it's the number as a percentage is held on its own for a long time. But for a lot of the clients that I talk to, first of all, there's a lack of awareness. Some people are also, they're afraid of the expense of doing it. You mentioned you have to get the accountants and the attorneys involved, the appraisers, the bankers, it's hard, and it can be expensive. And then of course, culturally dealing with your employees. A lot of us as business, I own a 10-person company, and in my company, it's a dictatorship, it's my way or the highway, I'm not saying that's the best management style. It's just the way I am. And, I think there are a lot of people like me. And so sharing financial data and decision-making with your employees is an obstacle, I think, for some of us, I don't know. There's a lot of obstacles.
Yes, I agree, and that people are trying to reduce the obstacles, but we haven't seen it growing greatly, even with what people have done so far. Now, the 10% of the Americans who are owners through the ESOPs. Or something just like an ESOP,
the co-op or
something
like
else.
That, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest number in the world.
Interesting.
So I like to tell Europeans, I say something like, you guys talk about socialism, ... We've got more worker ownership, and that's clearly the best kind of, quote, socialism you could imagine.
God, don't say that, please. Oh my God. People start realizing that here, and all of a sudden there's a revolt against ESOP. But that's where the citizens share. We're back to the forming of the country. And that's what our leaders, our founding fathers wanted, was that they all thought about it. Everybody's got their plot of land because that's the technology of the time. And Madison even did this calculate. He was very, very sharp kind of character. He did calculations. Gee, the businesses were businesses that had employees. So it wasn't your family farm. They were growing. At what rate were they growing? And he said somewhere around 1920, American democracy would end because we would no longer have, the family farmer as the basis of democracy. That happened more quickly, but we still managed to keep our democracy. So, luckily Madison wasn't totally, you don't need, independent farmers to have a democracy. Agreed.
Like that.
I agree. All right. Final question we have, and I have so many more questions I'm not even going to get to. We have to do a part 2 to this conversation. But Richard, listen, over the course of your career, you have written so much about workers and labor. You have a book called America Works. You have a book called What Workers Want. A book of about unions, goes all the way back to the 80s. Now I'm taking you back in time. What do unions do? I know you've been in academics all of your life, but if you were your own business owner and you had a company of 50 employees or 100 employees, what kind of an employer would you be, knowing what you know about the American worker, what works, what doesn't work, what they want, what they don't want, whether a union is, good or bad for your business? What kind of an employer would you be? What kind of a company would you run?
It's a good question. First, I'd say what I wouldn't be. I wouldn't be a dictatorial employer.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and that's just because I do employ people, but of course it's postdocs and graduate students and research people. And I do think I generally know more than they do. That's why I'm in my position and they're, learning or whatever it is. But I also know that they will be creative if they have their own leeway. Right. And it's better that they make a mistake, perhaps, or try something that I don't think is fruitful and cost us some time and money, because they also will come up with something I didn't think of that is much better. And so now when you said to 50 employees, that's a little different than the small scale operation I would be.
And usually if I can just say, usually the tipping point is when you have to hire an HR manager, and that's somewhere I found around that 50 employee mark, then your business becomes a different kind of business, when it comes to your relationship with your employee. Now it's really important to have policies and procedures and, all of that, right?
That's probably correct. Though it's 50, you may still be able to deal with it. But so it's 100, whatever number it is, there's a number. But then it's a question of if you're at the top of the hierarchy, is that you divide things so that there's still this opening. Let me give you an example of this in the sorry, being so academic, but the academic world. When you look at a paper written on astronomy, it could have 1,000 names, meaning it's a huge operation. It's a big business. There are people who will go to Chile, wherever the telescope is, and watch it and take notes, and she'll take digital notes, of course, whatever they're doing. And then there'll be other people who have some mathematics who can take the data and turn it into something. So it's 1,000 people. So how could they possibly incentivize all of them? Well, the way the work is broken up, there's a team that does this. And it gets down at the bottom level, it's a team of, let's say, 10 people responsible for X. And that's true in lots of companies. And so it's a question of you've got to trust the team that's a level or 2 levels or 3 levels below you if you're the top manager. And which means the HR or somebody's got to make sure that the leaders of those teams are very good and open and, and that you have on the people on the team that when they're hired, they're told you're expected to speak up, do this, that. If I were the CEO, I would say, and if I say something stupid, I want you to stand up immediately and say, sir, do it nicely, but don't say, right, you idiot, but say, sir, I think you're wrong for the following reason. And then everybody, then the culture would be, we all are in the same boat. We all want to succeed together. So
your approach, it sounds like your approach, if you're running your own business, and it was a bit of a large organization, is that you would break it down into teams, and it would all be about the leaders of your teams, and you would empower them to do what they got to do to get the most productivity and satisfaction out of your employees. Is that like?
Yes. And in the hiring thing, the key thing I would ask in the hiring thing is, if you see something wrong that you think is wrong, are you willing to stand up and say something? Or are you going to say, oh, I'm working for this machine. I don't give a damn. I'll do whatever the boss says as long as I keep my job and you leave me alone. That's not the kind of the culture you would want.
That's great. Well, Richard, in the past 30 minutes, we've talked about AI's impact on the workforce. We've talked about the importance of employee ownership. We've talked about what you would do if you could have another life and run your own business, what kind of a manager you would be. Fascinating, really helpful. And I hit like 10% of the questions I wanted to ask you. So I apologize for that, but I greatly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for having me. It was loads of fun. And it was interesting to hear your perspective on particularly on the employee ownership and the companies run from the top down.
Yeah. It's a different type of perspective, but I do see a lot of business owners out there that I just don't think they appreciate employee ownership as much, but, hopefully that will change. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Do you have a topic or a guest that you would like to hear on Thrive? Please let us know. Visit payx.me/Thrive Topics and send us your ideas or matters of interest. Also, if your business is looking to simplify your HR, payroll, benefits, or insurance services, see how Paychex can help. Visit the resource hub at paychex.com/works. That's WORX. Paychex can help manage those complexities while you focus on all the ways you want your business to thrive. I'm your host, Gene Marks, and thanks for joining us. Till next time, take care.
This podcast is property of Paychex Incorporated 2024. All rights reserved.